see if we have shown up on Facebook. We have not shown up on Twitch yet. Kevin, how you doing out there? Let us know if you can hear all of us. But you guys got to talk so they know if they can hear you.
Oh, who's in here? Can I see from my screen who joins and comments and stuff, or do I just go to the actual Facebook post?
You have to go to the actual Facebook post.
Okay.
That's where I'm at.
Cool.
There's going to be a little bit of lag for that too, right?
Just a slight lag.
Cool. Chris says I sound echoed.
Always sound issues. Anthony said you're echoing, but it's okay. How's everybody doing out there? How was your weekend? Give me 1 second. I'm trying to get. Okay, we are now supposedly live everywhere. I'm going to mute this. All right. I'm real quiet.
I have a robo voice. That's normal.
Yeah, that's pretty normal for me too.
I'm really quiet, they say. Let's go in here and check out this. Is that a little better? Check. Can you hear me?
You sound the same on my end.
I'll turn down these guys a little bit. Make sure maybe that echo will go out.
Chris says yes.
Sounds better?
Way better.
Way better. All right. So, this is the first episode of the HeatSeeker podcast. Man, me and Bridger have been trying to get this going for a while, but between his busy schedule, my busy schedule, it's been a rough go at it, but we appreciate Sean coming on for this first episode. Sean, RotoHeat Sean on Twitter. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about you?
Well, I've been playing fantasy football since 1995. I've been doing dynasty football since about 2007, and after joining this community, it's been a great experience, and I appreciate just having a chance to give back and actually do the writing for RotoHeat.com.
Well, we've appreciated you being on the team. I know you've been here since day one. One of the OGs. We've got a few OGs left, and you know, I appreciate everything that everybody's done, especially holding it down for me while I'm super busy and trying to get everything going that we want to offer. If I need to turn this up a little bit more, everybody out there, I can turn it up a little bit more. I just want to make sure it's not too crazy. Bridger, why don't you remind everybody out there a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. I haven't been playing quite as long as Sean. I haven't been alive as long as Sean has been playing. But I have been playing since I was pretty young. I started when I was 10 or 11 years old, and I'm 19 now. Just started Dynasty in 2016, but jumped right into it and sort of went all in my second year and started working with the RotoHeat and got involved in the Facebook page and that kind of stuff. So I love it and feel like I've got some decent advice for most people out there.
Yeah, it's the one thing that I want to remind everybody as we get going and this podcast gets going and live stream, none of us know half of what we think we know. As soon as you think you've got something pegged, there's an injury. Somebody comes out of the blue and takes somebody's spot. Somebody gets in trouble. There's only so much you can do, and just being as informed as possible is the most important thing. I was wondering, I might have missed something. Anthony's saying, burn. Someone has arthritis.
I think they're saying that I called Sean old.
Oh,
Yeah.
Not what I was going for.
Yeah, well, I haven't been playing, for those that are new. I haven't been playing since '95. I probably started in, '99, 2000-ish, when I was in high school. But I've been playing Dynasty since 2015, so I haven't been playing as long as a lot of people. But man, as soon as I started playing Dynasty, redraft was over for me. I can't do it. It's really frustrating. So I'm on the two ends of the spectrum. I'm either playing daily, or I'm playing Dynasty, and redraft is just kind of in the wayside for me. But so the first thing that we want to get into today is draft strategy. And we're going to go through startup draft and rookie draft strategy quickly, so that we can also talk about rookies that we like from this class, and some guys that, if you're in the hunt for a championship, that you can grab early for cheap, that we think are going to help teams this year. They might not be long-term players, but if you want to win a ship, these are the guys that you want to have on your roster in 2019. So we'll start with Sean. When you are in a startup, do you have any specific game plan that you follow every single draft that you are in?
I feel like I don't. I just like to change it up every now and then, try to get a couple different players. If I'm in an auction startup, it's going to be a little bit different. I can say I'm going to target this person, this person, this person. But if I'm in an actual draft setup or a snake draft, then I'd try to look to see where I can get certain players and try to get the best value that way. Maybe even trade some picks around.
So are you somebody that's specifically looking for wide receivers early, or are you the guy taking the top running backs early? Do you have any specific positional stuff that you try to attack early in the drafts?
I try to make it so two of my three top players are going to be receiver and the other one's a running back. That way it has a little bit of a spread out, a little bit more of a variety in case something was to happen. But I'm not trying to overspend to get like those top four running backs when the wide receiver class is so deep. Or a crop, I should say.
Yep, I'm a little bit different than that, but we'll jump over to Bridger real quick, and why don't you tell us how you go into your drafts and what game plans you've got in place?
I pretty much have my rankings, and I just kind of stick to them. I don't draft for position necessarily. I don't go in with any sort of premeditated thought on whether I want a receiver here or a running back. I just go with whoever I think is the best player available. I typically prefer receivers to running backs just because the running back value fluctuates so much, and I like to have more steady pieces. But my big thing is that I always just draft for upside. I try to stay away from the safe play during the startup draft, and especially during a rookie draft, because you can always trade for those guys. But you can't gain value any better than taking a player late who could blow up and be rounds and rounds above their current ADP this time next season. So that's typically what I go for.
Yeah, that's a lot more similar to where I'm at. Um, a lot of times I won't take a running back until the fifth round in a startup, and just because, like you said, the value fluctuates so much with running backs, and you can be looking at a running back that's going in the top 15, and a year later they're round 6, 7, whether it's injury or their production fell off or whatever it is. You don't typically see wide receivers drop that far unless they're in trouble, like Tyreek falling from, the what he was just about cracking, or maybe had cracked the first round there in a lot of ADPs, and now he's going in the 60s. But you don't typically see that with wide receivers. So I try to load up with wide receivers as much as possible, and then get those running backs that I think have either switched switch teams and they're in a better situation, or I think the running back ahead of them is going to drop off, but I'm going to spend the most of my big capital on wide receivers for sure. But I'm the same also, as I'm going best player available. If a running back does fall, and I think that I can trade him for a haul, then I have no problem taking him early. But if I don't draft a quarterback in a league, in a 1 QB league, then I don't. I'm not going to draft one just to draft one if there's somebody on the board I like. And then I'll just worry about that later. Excuse me. So the one thing that I find really interesting, and this happens in snake drafts, is the amount of trading up and down that happens in one of those drafts. Bridger, if you're in a snake draft, and I know you do mostly auctions, but are you the guy that's moving around a bunch, or are you kind of just staying and trying to find the value at the picks that you've got?
I move around quite a bit. I don't necessarily move around just for the sake of moving around. I keep my tiers pretty solid, and if there is a guy where, say I'm 5 spots back and there's one guy left in a tier for me, I'll absolutely try to move up and grab them. But more often than not, I'm moving back if I am trading. And I like to try to get extra rookie picks in following years during startup drafts as well. One thing, as far as startup trading goes, I'll never trade my upcoming first round pick, just because a team can underperform a lot worse than you're expecting, and you could end up trading away the 101 pretty cheap during a startup draft. So I like to hang on to my own rookie picks, but I do trade quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make, because you don't know, man. You lose. I've lost my top 3 picks in a draft before to injury by week 6, and then there's just nothing your team can do. So losing that first rounder for the next year. But I will say that, like, this past year, where I looked ahead to 2019 and wasn't real excited about the class, I was a lot more apt to use that pick to try to move up and get guys that I really liked. But going into 2020, I wouldn't want to be moving those 2020 picks too early, as picks just gain value as the year goes on. And as soon as you get closer to rookie drafts, then they start to explode. Sean, what about you? Are you trading around a lot and trying to get specific players move up or down, or what are you trying to do?
Yeah, I tend to move around a decent amount during the draft. I try to accumulate as much picks, try to move up, and I'll make tiers out like what Bridger was talking about, and that way, if like I have like a lot of people I like in the 4th round, I'm willing to trade down a couple of picks to gain an extra like 4th round pick, or as an example, or even like a 2000 or a following year first. So
Yeah, I think the trick is, and there was one thing that Bridger did say that I really liked about not trading just to trade, because I think a lot of people do that. But I'm not a tier guy, and I don't like. I have my rankings, but they're pretty soft rankings. So I just kind of just go with the flow in the draft and um, just see what happens, see who falls, because there's always that player that you like and you like, and then next thing you know, they're 2 rounds later somehow they've made it that far to you, and you get an opportunity to get value there. Okay, auctions. When you're going into an auction, do you have specific budgets laid out for specific players, or do you have uh, just kind of a roundabout idea of what you plan on spending for certain players? I know some people are like a hard budget. I'm not spending more than this for this guy. And then other people are like, well, depending on, if I saved $5 on this guy, I'll allocate that towards getting this other guy that I like. How do you go into your auction draft, Sean?
I try to sit there and say I'll budget a guy at this much, but it's not going to be a solid number. I'll fluctuate a little bit because you don't want to sit there and actually see that player you're trying to go after go be sold for only like $2-3 more than what you said. Also, it's you have to kind of go with the flow and adjust your rankings as you go throughout the auction because you don't want to sit there and tie up all your money into one or two players that you might not get, and then you have to try to, especially if you're doing super flex, you have to try to adjust for other quarterbacks and everything else. So,
What about you, Bridger?
Yeah, auction drafts, I'm a lot more sort of open in my strategy. I don't have a hard guideline for anything. My biggest issue with auction drafts is I'm an impulse buyer. So if I see a good deal, I just jump on it, whether it's a player that I necessarily like or not. And that's sort of messed me up in a few ways. If I see a guy that's going for less than he should, and then I sort of get stuck on that guy and end up paying more than I would have originally paid for him. But yeah, with an auction, I'm pretty wide open. Every auction draft is just so different. Compared to a snake draft, there's some predictability to it. But with an auction, being that players can be nominated in any order, and there's just different values out there. And if you're doing a super flex versus a 1 QB, and some leagues value quarterbacks more in super flexes than other ones will. So it's just a lot more wide open, and I just kind of try to go with the flow and get guys that I really like.
Yeah, I am so sporadic, and I don't have a lot of experience with auctions. Last year was my first year doing auctions, but just for an example, I spent in my first auction I spent 65% of my money on Odell and DeAndre Hopkins. And then I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? But I'm the same way. Like when I see a player pop up there and I like that player, like I want those players that I like. I live and die by the players that I like, and if I think that they fit my team, because I would say that I'm a little more positional in an auction than in a snake. Especially when a lot of players go at a certain position, they tend to get cheaper, and at least in the ones that I've been in. But yeah, like if I don't contain myself, I will end up spending a crap ton of money on 2 to 3 guys. I don't recommend doing that. So if you're listening, it's that's not me saying, hey, go out there and blow your budget on a couple guys and hope it works out, because it's probably not gonna in the long run.
So that's another thing with an auction versus a snake draft is how I was saying I've got my tier-based strategy, and in a snake draft I like to get the last guy in a certain tier because he's obviously the best value because he's going the latest in the draft. In an auction, I much prefer to get a guy earlier in that tier because as people start to see these tiers of quarterbacks go, so say Andrew Luck, Baker Mayfield, and Patrick Mahomes are off the board, and Deshaun Watson's still there, people are going to feel the need to overpay at that point. So I'd much rather get a guy earlier in that tier than wait for the last guy in the tier and end up in a bidding war with a bunch of people that are feeling desperate.
So we'll kind of segue with you saying that into our roster construction strategies, which for myself, it's really league dependent and how the draft goes. I don't have to have superstars at any position. I feel like depth is just as important as having that super stud. Obviously, having a guy that can win you weeks is awesome, but having somebody that can score and they score weekly and you don't have those ups, those peaks and valleys, that's the type of roster that I personally like to build. Now, to touch on this quarterback the super flex quarterbacks, I don't feel like I have to get that one of those guys in that tier if I can get two of the guys in the middle tier. I feel like there's always the 4 or 5 guys that separate themselves from the rest of the league, and then everybody else is just so close. So not everybody's going to get one of those guys, and I feel like you're going to get that advantage at another position if you don't take one of those. Now, and I'm not saying that you can't, but I'm not gonna go out of my way just to get one of those guys, to have one of those guys, if I feel like I can get a couple of those guys in the mid tier in an auction. Sean, what is your ideal roster? What does that look like? And be realistic, not like I've got, Andrew Luck, Zeke and Barkley and Odell and DeAndre Hopkins, but when you go into the draft, for example, if we were starting a draft right now and it was an auction, who would be the 6 guys that you would absolutely want?
The guys I'd be targeting would be, first I'd look at receivers and look at players like Devontae Adams or Hopkins, just because they, in my opinion, I like my stud receivers that have young quarterbacks who are going to be throwing to them for a long time and not question marks after a year or two. I know that's kind of weird saying I don't want Michael Thomas, but with Drew Brees retiring, I'm not sure how well he can do or he will perform at the same level with Brees there. Then I'll be looking at for running back, I'm mainly looking at players that can catch the ball out of the backfield. So even though he'd be more expensive this year, a player like Tariq Cohen would be good to have. Also, maybe looking at another mid-range running back, James White would be a cheap one that people aren't looking at for New England. I know that's a little bit of a muddled backfield, but he still put up a decent running back 1 numbers last year, even though that they had Sonny Michel coming in, taking a lot of his carries and everything. The tight end that's kind of more of a trickier one. So I'd probably look at getting a player that doesn't have a lot of people around him, maybe like a Noah Fant or as a young rookie to develop around, have on my team who has Joe Flacco thrown to him, or even a Vance McDonald, who would also be cheap but has decent chemistry with Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, we definitely feel the same way about tight ends. I'm not gonna overspend on tight ends very often. I like getting those guys young before they break out, so that I treat dynasty like the stocks. I want to get guys when they're lower and sell them when they're higher, and then build a strong roster of studs. But that doesn't mean you trade everybody as soon as they get into the top 12 value or something. But I definitely want to get out before they start going the other way. What about you, Bridger? If you had you're going into the draft tonight, 6 or so guys that you're targeting that you want on your roster.
Well, if you're talking about an auction draft and you're talking about a super flex, Anthony might not like it, but I'm always wanting 2 or 3 quarterbacks pretty early. I hate having holes at quarterback. They're extremely difficult to buy later in the year and as years go on. But I also really like to go for rookie quarterbacks because their value, they're sort of an unknown. They haven't produced in the league. They've got a lot of upside, and that's sort of a cheap time to get them. So Baker Mayfield last year, Deshaun Watson the year before that were big targets of mine. This year, I like to get my hands on Kyler Murray or Dwayne Haskins because if they perform early, their value is going to rise substantially. If they don't perform, their value is not going to drop that far because everybody is going to have patience with their franchise quarterbacks. They know they have 4 or 5 years to get it done before time's up for a new contract. Just like Jameis Winston, he's never, ever performed, and he's still going as a top 10 to 12 dynasty QB in drafts. So I really like to go for young, specifically rookie quarterbacks.
Yeah, that it blows my mind. It really does. It blows my mind that he's as expensive as he is right now. I'm with you. Tight ends and quarterbacks both, I like to get them early in their careers because they gain so much value. You know, guys, when you look at rookies at other positions, when they're hyped, they are so expensive to get, even when they haven't even touched the ball yet. And typically, quarterbacks and tight ends, people, I don't know if it's because they think, well, I might have to wait a year or two to get value out of them. But, man, look at where Kittle was last year. You know, he was getting drafted in like the 9th, 10th round, and now he's going in like the 3rd round in a lot of drafts. That's a lot of value to gain in one season from a player, and you don't typically get that from running backs and wide receivers unless somebody just completely comes out of nowhere. So I'm definitely with you guys there. So talking about roster construction, let's say you're 4 years in and you decide it's time to blow it up and rebuild. What is the first thing that you do, Sean?
The first thing I do is I look to see if I have any older assets at running back and try to unload those first. Try to get some younger players, some rookie picks or wide receivers, or even like we're talking about at the tight end position. Let's do the same at receiver, but I tend to want to keep anybody that's going to be like a younger or mid-range age receiver, like 27, 28. Just because you can still build around them, unless you can get a decent value for them to come back.
And what is the first thing that you do, Bridger?
If I'm rebuilding, I always trade away running backs, just because there's no use in them if you're going full rebuild. If you've got a guy like Zeke or even a guy who might have a little more longevity, like a Barkley or Christian McCaffrey, I'm going to sell them first every time because they're going to get you a lot of points week to week that you don't want. And they're also going to produce the fastest in rookie drafts. So this year you're getting a Josh Jacobs or a Miles Sanders. Both of those guys have a real shot at producing this year, whereas the receivers probably don't for the most part. And same thing looking towards the 2020 class. There's 4 or 5 running backs that could all be running back 2s next season if you're ready to start competing then. And I prefer to lose as many games as possible if you're rebuilding, of course.
Yeah, I feel like he kind of poked with a needle there, leaving my boy David Montgomery out of the running back conversation from this year. But I'm the same way. I want nothing to do with running backs in a rebuild. It's just a waste of their short window. You might as well get max value out of them and then target maybe some of those guys that are, you know, right now they're second on the depth chart, but maybe you don't feel like they're the guy in front of them is that good, and they might take that job from them, or just if they're an injury away from taking that starting job, you can see their value just skyrocket in no time. So I like to take the shots on the high upside running backs and then just overload on wide receivers, because if you can overload on wide receivers, then running backs are going to be easy to get at any time, whether it's, like you said, drafting them. I'm not so sure that there's going to be a lot of spots opened up come next year for guys to at least get full loads. I think right now is about the best crop of running backs that we've seen for a long time. There's a lot of good running backs in play right now. Teams like Miami might be a spot where one opens up, or there's not a lot that just come to mind. Obviously, Buffalo might be one, but Tampa, but there's just not like a lot. And then not only do you have to have, an ample amount of teams that have those openings, but then these players have to fall to them. You see teams right now like, Washington with 3 running backs now on their roster. You see teams like New England just seems like they're going to just take running backs every year. Now you got guys, we got, some news on Gurley and his knee, but, one of the running backs that a lot of people were talking about is now behind him. And, Weber behind Zeke. And these guys weren't, like, supposed to be super studs or anything, but there's just no guarantee that one of these teams, knowing that they're either going to have to pay a running back or just the short shelf life of the typical running back. I don't know how many guys even this year and next year are going to be like thrust into huge roles. They might be, implemented into the offenses, but I don't know if they're going to get enough touches to be startable, like, the past 4 years where a bunch of running backs came in and we could start them right away. Like the Fournette rookie season with him and Cook and McCaffrey and Kamara and Hunt and all those guys, immediately just taking over jobs and producing. I don't know now with all these running backs that have come in if we're going to see that over the next 2 to 3 years. But I do agree. When I'm rebuilding, I want to get those young tight ends, like I said. Like in this year, like I would be targeting Goddard, Fant, Hawkinson, and trying to get those guys when they're, late rookie picks, first-round rookie picks, rather than top 4 startup picks. And then same thing with quarterbacks. Like if I'm in 1 QB, like I'll just start taking guys at the back end of the 2nd, 3rd round, and then hope one of them pans out and I can use them for 5 years. But I don't want to be paying, the price that it takes to get, a Russell Wilson in a startup draft. All right, so we've talked about these rookies a little bit. And do you guys have any other thing when it comes to roster construction that you want to say here before we switch into 2019 rookies?
No, I'm good.
I was going to say, even though some players were injured last year, you can still go on a limit take them for a decent value this year. So keep an eye out for people like Jimmy G and even Le'Veon Bell, who sat out a year to be a lot better than they were, or value to be a lot better than last year.
Yes, I agree. I agree there. Here, before we move on, I'm going to just go through the chat real quick and make sure that, if there were any questions or suggestions, we cover those here before we move on. Anthony says draft for value, typically wait on quarterback. Chris says snag a top young running back if you're lucky. If not, load up on wide receiver talent. Taylor says, I'm with Bridger. Worst case scenario, you end up with a surplus at a position. So he must be referring to just drafting best player available and not worrying about positional drafting. You can always trade your least favorites from that group to fill out other needs on your roster. Rob says he has a hard-on for wide receivers and startups, and then he'll fill in running backs when needed. Anthony says always wait on QB. And then he says Rick for Prez. No, I don't want that job. Kevin wants to know, and I don't know if either of you are in a tight end premium league yet, but Kevin wants to know if startup auction strategy changes quite a bit in a tight end premium. Bridger, are you in some tight end premiums?
I am. I'm actually doing a tight end premium draft now. It's not an auction draft, but usually I wait on tight ends, whether it's a premium or not, because their value within their position is still going to be roughly the same, depending on their touchdown dependency and whatnot, compared to receptions. But I'm starting to kind of change my opinion on that with this year, with there being so few great tight ends. And the guys that are great, how valuable they are. I've done a couple of startup drafts and just gotten stuck with pretty bad tight ends later. But I don't know. It's just tough for me to pull the trigger on one early in the 4th or 5th round, and it would be hard for me to pay a whole lot in an auction draft for them as well. So I'm actually kind of stuck on my opinion as far as tight ends go in a tight end premium.
Let me ask you this. What is the tight end premium in the leagues that you're in?
Usually a 1.5 compared to 1.
1.5.
Yeah.
What about you, Sean? Are you in any tight end premiums?
I am. This will be the first one I have. Could be coming up this summer, as far as the tight end premium. I've seen, from what I've seen though, as far as some other people's rankings is, or what some other people have played, is those top 3 or 4 tight ends will be up there at the, will have like a high or a mid wide receiver 1 value. It seems like Zeke and, or it's not Zeke, sorry, like Ertz and Kelsey will have as much value as let's say like Keenan Allen, because they're getting those 1.5 points per touchdown, reception, all that, and that will help out some of the lower value, like people were talking about earlier, Vance McDonald, even at an ASJ, to sit there and bump them up a little bit to like a wide receiver 3 type of a value.
Yeah.
So if I can't get one of those top 3 or 4 for decent value, then I'd still probably hold off a little bit, even though it's tight end premium, just because I don't want to spend all my money on tight ends and quarterbacks going in. But it's one of those, but you have to feel out how the auction or how the draft is going, I would say.
Right, and tight end, and I keep making this comparison, but tight end and quarterback, the positions are really, really similar typically, because you've got those 3 to 5 guys that separate themselves from the rest of the pack, and then it's kind of like a toss-up of who's going to finish where when you're talking about the end of season rankings. They're just they're so volatile of positions. A few interceptions here in the red zone can take a QB down 5 spots from where he would have. 2 rushing touchdowns can move him up a few spots or down a few spots. So if you don't get one of them first 3, it's basically just a bunch of guys that can end up being similar value for you. So I'm not gonna go crazy if I don't get one of those first few guys at either of those positions. Taylor says, can you guys still hear me?
Yeah.
Because it says live video was interrupted. We've got some crazy storms here in the Midwest, so I don't know. I could end up losing power at any time, but it looks like it came back. Taylor says, what if you hate your team immediately after the startup draft? How long do you wait before blowing it up?
That's Taylor taking a shot at me for a draft that we're in together, that I don't like. So, yeah, I'm going to try to blow that up immediately.
See, here's where I'm at with it. And I didn't know that was that Taylor was throwing a needle in there. But when I like a team, it seems like that team either I have a bunch of injuries or they just don't perform the way. So if I ended up coming out of a draft where I'm like, man, I really hate this, I'm probably gonna keep it because I probably did better than I do when I like what I end up with. So I would probably at least give it a year or two before I completely blow it up. What about you, Sean?
I'm in the same situation as you, Rick. There have been multiple times I've done like redraft uh, fantasy leagues where I've completely not liked my lineup or how the draft went, and then I won the championship those years. And times where I've liked my team and I finished like middle of the pack. So if I have a bad draft, I tend to just wait a couple months, see how everything plays out, and then play it by ear.
Yeah, it's tough, man. It seems like every time I like a roster, it shits the bed. Um, all right, so that was all of our questions and little comments that we had on roster construction, and we'll definitely hit this up more in the future. So if you have any questions, make sure you join our Facebook community. The link is scrolling across the bottom of the screen here. You can also join our Discord chat. And oh man, we've got all kinds of chats going in there. This weekend was a little quiet with it being a holiday weekend, but typically it's going hard in there. All right, and I know that me and Bridger are gonna have some different points of view when it comes to these 2019 rookies, because I still feel like he kind of threw a shot at me there a little bit ago, but why don't we just start with Sean, and why don't you give me your number one rookie target for this year and tell me why you like him?
No, no, I did my rookies based on this year, not for a career for dynasty. But this still all pretty much would be right around the same. My number one rookie performer for this year, I even wrote an article about it recently, was Paris Campbell for the Colts. I feel like with as many other options that they have in Indy, the defenses won't be able to cover Hilton, won't be able to cover Bunches, Ebron, Campbell, and then still worry about Marlon Mack coming out of the backfield. He has the decent speed, he can line up anywhere, and I don't think he could be double teamed that much.
Yeah, I like that Paris Campbell. If I had to choose one, it's definitely DK Metcalf, but that's not talking this year specifically. That's for career. And that's because, in my eyes, he's got by far the highest ceiling in the class, but he's never being drafted at the top of rookie drafts. I've never seen him go earlier than 101, or I've never seen him go 101 or 102. It's always been 103 or later, and I've drafted him everywhere that I could.
Yeah, I think DK is also the guy, but um, just to be a little bit different, I will go with Noah Fant. He was the guy that I wanted so badly, and he ended up going one pick ahead of me in like three different drafts. And I was trying to trade up, couldn't get anybody to bite, and I missed out on him. And I think I only ended up with one share, and it pisses me off so bad because it was kind of the same exact thing last year with Goddard. Even though he fell, it seemed like every time the guy right in front of me would just snipe me. Um, but I love that young core that they're putting together in Denver. Um, Obviously, Flacco has liked his tight end in the past. I mean, we've seen so many. I'm not going to say talentless tight ends, but Dennis Pitta, um, all kinds of them. They've had all kinds of them that have produced and with Flacco. So I think he could definitely produce right away in that offense. The whole offense is young, so I don't think that anybody's gonna like jump out and just like completely the own the offense. But DK, that upside, man, if he can run routes, then he's gonna be filthy because he's got one of the best throwing quarterbacks throwing to him now. And I think that Seattle's defense has taken a hit. They're going to have to throw more. They're not going to be stopping people and playing from ahead all the time. They're going to have to throw the ball more. And that's dangerous because Russell Wilson is so efficient with the ball. It could be nasty out there with DK.
Yeah, and another thing with DK is that Russell Wilson can create all the time that he needs in the pocket. So even if DK isn't a great route runner, he's going to have time to just physically dominate these guys, which we know he can do. He's faster than them, he's bigger than them, and Russell Wilson's going to get the ball to him, and he's by far their best red zone option at this point in time. They don't really have anyone else to target in the red zone. And so I think he could have a really big rookie year, and I'm confident that he'll have a great career. And I think he could be one of these Julio type of guys that are going to be at the top of dynasty drafts for 10 years. Anthony said DK is great for upside. Same with Mecole Hardman, but very low floors as well. And I would agree with that. But I'd also ask who in this class doesn't have a low floor. The only guys that come to mind for me are Josh Jacobs and maybe David Montgomery. You're welcome, Rick.
Wow.
I mean, those guys are going to get consistent carries right from the get-go, and I don't think anyone else is. And there's no safe receiver prospect in this class. There's none. So I'm just going for ceiling with DK.
That was my exact argument with DK, with everybody, talking about floor and, he could end up being, another Dorial Green Beckham or Justin Hunter, these size freaks, and that never panned out. But I just never felt like any of these receivers were safe bets. So I'm gonna take the guy that I think has a lot more upside than any of the other guys if I can get him, and I ended up getting him in multiple. I think the first 3 drafts I got him at either pick 4 or 5, and I was very, very happy with that. Sean, second guy, you went with Paris Campbell, and who you got number 2?
Well, my number 2 was DK Metcalf. We've already kind of talked about him.
Skip to 3.
Josh Jacobs for the Raiders. I feel like that he's going to get all the carries. There's no real threat to him as far as stealing any of his carries. He's a 3-down back. I could see John Gruden and Carr using him a lot throughout the year to take pressure off of Carr and that offensive line. And long term, I could see not being that high on because of how much use he'd get over the first 2-3 years, just in case he gets worn down. But these first couple of years, I think he'll be a pretty good asset for fantasy.
Yeah, I've been open. I don't hate Josh Jacobs. I just wish that we had a better 101 option in 2019. But I'm not a big fan. I'm not as confident as a lot of people are in him. But I can't blame anybody for taking him 101 with the class that we were. None of us are thankful for this class. I don't think. I've not heard anybody like, oh man, I love my rookie drafts this year. You love them for what they are, but like actually loving them is a different thing, I guess. Bridger, number 2 for you.
My number 2 is Miles Sanders. He was my running back 1 for a long time leading up to the draft, and I'm relatively happy with the landing spot. I'm not a huge Josh Jacobs fan either. I think he's going to be solid, but I don't think he has any real potential to be anything special, and I think Miles Sanders can be. And once again, I always draft for ceiling. I'd rather target safer players to have on the bench as a bye-week filler or as a consistent starter later and go for the guys that can be first-round startup picks before they are.
Yeah, I liked Sanders a lot going into the NFL draft, but I'm not big on his landing spot. I think it's very odd, that they went out and got
Jordan Howard.
Jordan Howard is the name I was looking for, and it was completely spacing me. That's how long I've been off of Jordan Howard. As a Bears fan, I knew that his fantasy value was going to drop, and that's how long I've been off him. I don't even remember his name anymore. It's just real odd that they went and got him, and then they went and got Sanders when they've still got, Smallwood and Clement. I don't think anybody thought Josh Adams was going to be anything, but it's so muddled, and I don't know exactly what they're doing. When I thought they were going to go to Josh Adams last year after he performed pretty well, they didn't. I just don't know what's going to happen in that backfield. I definitely think it's going to be split, but I'm not a Sanders hater. I don't know about that situation in Philly. My number 2 guy. Here, let me see what Anthony's saying here. He says, and this is funny because Harry is like the top wide receiver for most people, and we haven't even talked about him. Harry has a nice floor too, in my opinion.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
Yeah, I'm not seeing that either. I literally don't